Okay, I think we will begin. So, thank you everyone for joining us for Creative Healing for Youth in Pain, or CHIPS webinar, The True Temperature Check, Whole Health for Mind, Body, and Spirit. My name is Dr. Samantha Levy. I'm a clinical psychologist specializing in treating youth with chronic pain. I run the parent support groups through CHIP and the teen and parents and caregiver support groups through the Los Angeles Dysautonomia Network. For those of you new to our community, CHIP is an online nonprofit organization that empowers youth living with chronic pain to heal by altering the brain's pain circuits through exposure to creative healing experiences, educational resources, and peer support. Today, our guest, Dr. Lori Baudino, is a clinical psychologist who has been practicing clinician for over 20 years. Her work fuses integrative health into hospital care, private practice, parent education, academic teaching, and global outreach. Dr. Baudino is a leading advocate for integrating movement and body awareness into psychotherapeutic practice. Her work is helping to change how we think about health and healing, and she inspires people worldwide to celebrate and move together. Before we begin, I would like to review a few housekeeping items. First, please enter your questions in the Q&A section throughout the webinar. I will incorporate audience questions in today's conversation. The chat is open for discussion, but we cannot guarantee it will be included in the conversation with our speaker and myself. Second, our webinar is being recorded. Previous CHIP webinars are available on the CHIP's YouTube channel. A link to our YouTube channel webinar playlist will be in the chat. Finally, please consider donating $25 to CHIP if you find our monthly webinars valuable. Donations can be made at mychip.org/donation. The link will be in the chat. Okay, now we're ready to begin. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Baudino.
Thank you for having me. What a
Of
beautiful
course.
mission we're on, right?
Yes,
Good to hear.
it is. So, can you tell us a little bit first about what you do?
Yes. So, as mentioned, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and I'm a board certified dance movement therapist. So, I see children, I always say 0 to 18, because I work with parents as they're bringing these little ones into the world, all the way through 18. And I work in private practice. I also go into the home as well as support and advocate within the school system. And then I also have been able to provide therapeutic support in pediatric hospitals to children with cancer and terminal illness. And my approach, I know we're going to talk about it more today, but I like to say that since experiences are felt in the body and expressed through movement, that this is just a lens, is an adjunct to what we know of in terms of mental health. And that's what I do. I really love supporting children and all of us to understand children's capacities and that we are feeling living beings that have all these emotions. And I could talk on forever, but that's about me. And I'm also a mom. I'm a mom of two, and I'm here in Los Angeles.
Wonderful. So I know you advocate for mindful movement rather than the prescriptive mindfulness exercises like breathing. So how can parents use embodied learning in real world situations, like in nature or sports or travel or the arts, to help engage their children and foster connection while also supporting emotional regulation?
Yeah, so it's wonderful that we've come really far in our academic settings and even in our society of really embracing this whole idea of mindfulness here in the United States.
Yeah.
And I just know that as you even hear this, if you're thinking about how you move, that we naturally all come back to rest. If you've ever heard me speak, I always say this phrase of this. I learned it way back in my master's of rapprochement. It's this word about coming back to the self. And this idea that as we're moving, our body will naturally resolve. Just like when we have emotions, they come in and they go out. So when we're thinking about how do we support parents, is just first and foremost letting them know that children moving is part of their communication. And so that might be, rather than jumping into conversation with your child with words, it's really noticing what's their posture like, how are they moving, and how can you move with them as you're talking. And then that naturally, instead of saying, oh, we have to sit still and breathe, which then feels, I know a lot of kids express to me, oh, we have to do that class where we sit still and breathe, or,
Mhm.
oh, that breathing thing, I've tried it, it doesn't work. That we take away the word work and just notice that they're already doing it. children get to explore and move, and all of a sudden they rest and they breathe. And so it's more about awareness. Um, I know we're going to explore this today is just even noticing the senses. So I love making sure children are in nature, that children are traveling. My family, we're big travelers. We've lived all over the world together, and really thinking about how do we infuse the senses? How do we pay attention to the sounds we're hearing, to the sights we're seeing, the colors, the textures, the shapes, and then even most importantly, our body. How do we feel our body? Oftentimes children would be like, I don't know unless I touch, like I have to feel with my fingers. But can they be aware of the coldness at the tip of their nose or the heat in their feet? So really helping them notice what's going on in my body.
Yeah, so you're talking about accessing mindfulness through our senses. So do you have some specific suggestions for how parents can create that sensory diet for their children that supports meaningful learning and emotional regulation? And how can parents use these sensory exercises to gain insight into their own body's
Mm.
responses, like recognizing what sensations are calming versus overwhelming for themselves and for their children?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as you're saying it, lots of things are coming up for me, but one of the pieces is that we tend to be aware during the holidays or big transitions. We're about to, I know this is recorded and going to be posted, but right now we're kind of ending school, we're going into summer. But any of those big changes come up, we tend to feel more reactive, right? The patterns come up, memories come up. And these are good times to recognize the overwhelm or those triggers and lots of different ways we do that, one of which can be the senses. So really noticing, is it the visual impact of the clutter around the house that feels like it can get you? Is it the sound of all the noise, everyone bustling around, too much talking, right? Is it auditory? Is it the feeling of maybe children climbing on you, or or needing that sweater but you don't have it on you because you were just outside and it was hot. Now you come inside and you wish you had something comfy. So really being aware of what is it that kind of calls your attention. I say it kind of like taps you. And then we can use that to support our regulation. So we can do this with kids, but we can do this with ourselves. I love giving this to parents, is that when we, let's say, feel that overwhelmed by all the visuals, we might either use our eyes to hone in and see that while there's clutter, we also see there's lots of smiles and there's lots of colors and there's a lot of activities. So it feels loved and like really used, really accessed and indulged in. There's like indulgence. Or we can kind of help our eyes kind of dissipate and turn on our ears, really start to listen to the laughter, listen to the bustling conversation, listen to the expression that's being made, maybe this music. So we can kind of play with, do we activate what's being activated or do we switch and use a different sense? If your children, the noise is going on, we might counter it with, again, like wrapping ourselves with something we love, or putting an essential oil or a candle on, using the sense of smell. So lots of different examples, but all to say, first and foremost, is to give credit that we have these abilities. We have access to these senses and they're a part of us. And so we can use them. And what's so amazing, my other last thing I'll kind of say about this is just that when we use one sense, the other dissipates. When we're
Mhm.
feeling a sense of pain in the body, but we turn on, I always talk about it being empowering. It's not about, I don't believe in distraction, but when we see it as like we're empowering our senses, we're like turning on our what we're listening to, all of a sudden that pain, it doesn't go away. We don't make it like it never happened. That would be quite dismissive. We still have that pain, but all of a sudden we have another ability. We have something else that we can bring to our awareness and we can utilize for our regulation and our comfort.
Right. So it sounds like you're talking about how the parents can use their own senses to regulate.
Mhm.
But it also feels like for the parents, they want to also model using this. So how can the parents, particularly model using their senses with how they speak and interact with their kids, what their tone of voice is, what their words are, and the way they express their passions and interests around modeling this emotional self-regulation and this self-awareness to their kids.
Yeah, so the beauty of what I call dance movement therapy, this lens I use, is that this dance becomes an acronym. So the D is these differentiated parts. So really noticing, like I'm kind of saying again, like noticing your kids moving, okay, and then allowing your children to see your movements, noticing them as valuable. Then we attach together. We notice that that A is attaching. We have rituals and patterns and preferences. So during this time, during those heightened changes or dynamics, really seeing about like what kind of rituals are you creating in your home? How are you modeling that for your child? It might be as simple as creating clean, accessible spaces in the child's room where they're putting their toys. So allowing them to see that and be a part of that with them, helping them to make sure they're putting their things back where they have like a meaningful spot. And then the N is a big part of what I would say in regards to your question is that the narrating. So really bringing words to what this looks like. So when we say to the child, "Oh, I'm noticing that you're moving really, really quickly," or I'm noticing all of the papers all over the ground, or all the Legos everywhere, or I'm hearing a loud, loud voice, and there's so much talking, and I'm hearing it really fast. It then C in the word dance, it brings it to consciousness. The child's like, "Oh, I am doing that." The child then gets to decide, am I doing it more? Do I want to do it less? It brings them in the here and now. And then we have this E, that empathic engagement. We have this back and forth where they're a part of this curiosity with us and we have a relationship. And I truly find that children feel so valued. And it's so accurate because we're telling them what is happening. We're not kind of putting a label on it. We're really saying what we see. And then the child starts to identify it themselves. They have their own sense of awareness. And kids are excellent at this. In my sessions, they're always able to tell me what they're doing and what it looks like and how they're moving, whether they're putting words to it or they're just doing it. They're moving.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're talking about how people express what they're feeling, what their life experiences are, what they're bringing to it, what emotions they're experiencing through movement, and that the body state is mirroring their emotions.
Yeah, I do. I see such a parallel process. What we see in the body is what emotionally and psychologically is happening. We know that when there's a pathology, an illness, a disease, a change, that our body has more one-dimensional way of moving. You know, you can imagine that rigidity that comes into the body or the chaos, right? The big tantrum. And then when we have integration, we have that fluid, easy moving, that adaptive child or individual parent that can go fast and then slow down. That means we have a state of health, right? And we see this all the time. And it's really exciting because then we have information, not only with like what's happening in the brain intellectually, but we actually can like visually see it. I love asking parents, like you could play charades, you could act out your child and you would know how they would move and what that looks like, you know, and we forget sometimes we're like, I don't know what they're doing or I don't know how they feel, but we actually know a lot. And children know a lot about themselves too.
It sounds like you're talking about, I mean, we often talk about how things going on in the brain, cognitively, let's say, or emotionally, are
Mhm.
affecting our body. But it sounds like you're also talking about through this mindfulness and such, how the body also affects the mind.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just recently, I mean, I have many examples, but recently I was in a group of teenagers, adolescents at a high school, and really asking them about, you know, how does, I call it body knowledge. It's this awareness that our body moves internally, externally, in between one another, and how those movements affect how we feel, but also impact how we're perceived. And we
Mm,
talked about this incredible dialogue around, it was a multicultural symposium, really talking about how does that relate to our culture, our identity? How do we move in our culture, in our home versus with our peers and our friends? And how in dyads, they could talk about how their body language is perceived. And it might look different than what internally they feel, but the
mm,
external is actually really relevant.
right,
You can talk all you want and say, I'm happy, but your body looks depleted. You know, we want them to match, right? You want
right,
we're
right.
to match, yeah, yeah.
So in terms of the how the body itself communicates, how does nonverbal communication help parents specifically to connect to their children? Like, how can parents engage their children with these nonverbal cues?
Mm. It brings me back to their younger years, in their, toddler years when we were really playing. And I see a parallel. I know you and I were talking about this the other day. I was probably going on a whole rant about this kind of repetition of what happens when these toddler years and then they repeat again in adolescence. And to me, it's about finding that predictability in parenting, helping us see that like what we saw in these young years, they repeat again. And we can be like, oh, I get that. I see that again. And so when a child is moving and we're joining them as a child, right? We tend to like do that parallel play. You sit next to the child and you're side by side and you're moving a ball, right? And it's all about that ball. And so parents at this time, you maybe have an older child and they're sitting there with a device. Maybe they're sitting there with something like they're writing and you sit next to them and you also join them in writing, or you also join them in your work. Maybe you're working side by side. And it's about that object in front of you. But then what happens is there's this connection that's made, and it becomes about the relationship of sharing that moment together. So not only is it about, let's go back to the ball example, it's about we're passing this ball and it becomes a game. And so the ball doesn't really matter. It's about like, how are we playing? And then all of a sudden there's communication. There's a problem that we have to solve. Maybe the ball rolls away and we have to try to get it, right? And so all of this is nonverbal, but it mirrors these dynamics that we deal with every day. How do we problem solve with our kids? How do we communicate with them? How do we join them? How do we let them know that we can follow their lead and they can follow ours? So it's like, again, that dance back and forth.
Mhm.
So again, I would just invite that to have meaning, to say that we can just simply play and join our children. Today is my kid's last day of school. And we played with bubbles, and they're in high school, and we took out bubbles, wands, and moved around. So it's never too
You're
late.
never too old for bubbles. That is my mantra all the time. I have stacks of bubbles in my office for all ages.
Like, Mom, are you trying to have us be young again? I'm like, yes, I am. And they're like,
Right.
okay, woo. Um, and all of a sudden they were right in there. So walking, taking walks, being in nature, playing sports, dancing. I used to have a rule that if you get off from the table, you have to at least be dancing while you go get, whatever, the ketchup or the water or whatever you need. Just giving attention to these moments, they matter. Walking to the car and they give you their backpack, that trading of the backpack, that's movement, that's meaningful. Giving them a hug, um, these opportunities, little moments that actually hold a lot of value in our kids' lives.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about how you, this webinar
Yeah.
is about temperature check.
Yeah.
So I want to address that because that's what's in the title.
Okay.
So tell us about the true temperature check that you discuss, how parents can get a comprehensive baseline of their children with this temperature check. Um, that you focus on understanding the child's mental state, body state, energy levels. Can you explain how parents can assess these areas,
Absolutely.
perceptions and movement in the world and energy and all of that?
Yeah. So if you have a partner at home, another adult at home, it could be another care provider, it could be another family member, really having an opportunity to have a dialogue around this, but then also just knowing that there's no finite timing that we need to have this like nailed down, mastered in any way. It's ever evolving. But we really want to say that the temperature check comes from this concept of, I was noticing during COVID how much we were taking temperatures, right? We were all there taking temperature, taking temperature. And we know fevers are contagious. So I was thinking about that word contagious, and that we could also have things that are positive be contagious. We could think about true temperature of like, well, we get our medical temperature. We also do this with cortisol levels and hormones, and we check for different levels when we are assessing our health. We also can assess our mental health, our body, our physical, like in terms of how we move in the world, and our energy level, like you mentioned. And we don't often do this. It's something that kind of goes to the wayside until there's some crisis. I often get asked, when should children come to therapy? And I think it's never too early, meaning you could come and get a baseline of your child, know who they are, and have a space to have a team member, that therapist, to like navigate this relationship with. So the mindset is really thinking about, how does your child perceive the world? And again, as you're listening, really think, do you know this about them? Do you know relatively how they respond to the world, how they think of it? When they are listening to a podcast, when they're watching a show, when you're having a family discussion, hopefully when you're reading a book, how are they perceiving the outcome? Are they looking at the positive of the book? Are they taking out the parts that seem really scary? Are they kind of like hot with anxiety and reactive with their words, like short, curt tones of voice, really kind of barreling over you? Are they more responsive in their language? Are they perseverative, like they're repeating themselves over and over and over again? What does that sound? What is the voice, the tone, and the types of words they're saying in their mindset? I know that Carol Dweck's work, a lot of research behind this, that growth mindset, really looking at the effort base, or they like very fixed mindset, really kind of thinking about like external rewards. So again, lots of ways we can think of that mind and what is that baseline. And then the body, is it receptive? Like, do they come in the world and they're like open arms and they're ready to jump in, smiling faces, heads up, postures open? It actually matters. Or is your child the one that turns around, hunches down, face scrunched up, has a scowl on their face? And I want to pause as I say this because I actually don't see it as a judgment. I'm not trying to say they shouldn't be that way or they have to be a different way, but just to get a baseline. And the last level is that energy. And actually, it's so interesting. Every time I've asked, especially the adolescents, about energy, their spirit, they know this one so well. And I am hearing consistently how depleted they are, letting
Mhm.
me know their energy is just low. And they're like doing sports and they're doing theater and they're doing, their homework and they're doing all the things they're, supposed to do. And they're letting me know they are tired. And that one seems so obvious to them. They're like, oh, I just didn't sleep. I'm exhausted. I'm excited. But their energy level, there's like a depletion in their eyes, right? They're like kind of sullen. So, really thinking about that energy for your child. So, then we have a baseline. And I want to believe, and I've seen this in my practice for over 20 years, that all of a sudden when we have that baseline, we know when it shifts. We know when your child tends to speak calmly and clearly with you, and then they're all of a sudden like kind of snapping at you, biting at you with their words. Hey, that's a different mind, or their body language, usually they like move around the house really organized. All of a sudden they're dropping things, they're moving things like, or they're not even getting out of bed, right? Or their energy level. Maybe they're all energized and they're ready to go to all the events, and all of a sudden they're like not wanting to go, right? We could see that shift and then we can address it and support it rather than waiting till there's a crisis and saying, hey, I didn't know it changed. And I hear that all the time. And I don't know how you feel about this too, is like, I didn't know. Right. And again, I don't say that as a judgment. We're all human. That's why I say there's no end point. Like we're always learning this. But
Yeah.
the true temperature gives an opportunity to say, like, what if we get that baseline?
Yeah, I find that parents, they do know in the kind of recesses of their mind, they're just not bringing it to the forefront of their consciousness. It's like, yeah, I kind of sensed something was different, but I didn't really realize how serious it was or how
Yeah.
bad off they were.
Right. And we can imagine, the even being parents, right? We can imagine the hope of it being like, is it normal? Is it, maybe other people have this experience? Could it just be an off day? Or like our wishful thinking, right? We can be like little 3-year-olds too with that wishful thinking, like, I want this all to be okay. So I'm just gonna hope that it's for the best and they'll come through it. And fortunately, children are so resilient and they do. They do, mostly come through it, right? But to be able to have access to say like, I know this child, and we really do know them if we give it some thought, give a beat to say this is them, and then notice. And the other thing is like when I think about the children that are have in our history had such big reactions in our world, negative trauma crisis of events, I'm always curious who saw that child before that crisis happened. How
Mhm.
were they moving? What did that look like? Were their heads up and they were smiling? Were they hiding? Were they withdrawn? And I can imagine there was movement that looked different. I
Mhm.
imagine their language sounded a certain way. I imagine their energy looked different.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So, in a parent's quest to help their child, what about you're saying it's never too early to start therapy, get a baseline before the crisis begins. What about for parents seeking their own therapeutic support, not just during the crisis, as an ongoing process? Can you speak to the importance, in your opinion, of creating space for parents to learn and gain insights into their own well-being?
Absolutely. Yes. I love that tried and true parenting from the inside out. Um, yeah, absolutely. It should be fun. It should be predictable. I love finding that predictability, as I mentioned, in parenting. And we get to learn about ourselves. I do see our children as these little gurus that kind of hold a mirror to our faces and let us work on the things that maybe we're like, I don't want to work on that. I don't, I don't want to see that stuff. And there it is, right? Again and again. And so it gives us an opportunity to learn about ourselves. And again, taking away the judgment and giving an opportunity to see that we can ask questions about, this event happened today and I had a feeling about it. I didn't feel good about the way my child spoke to me, or I'm wondering about why my child's in their room all the time, or, you know, I'm sure it's the very go-to one is like my child's on technology. I know it's really negative for them and it's not okay, but I can't do anything about it. Well, what if we could do something about it? I'm a huge advocate in saying you absolutely could. Um, and so just having a person to build your team. I tend to say to parents that it's not about, for me, not coming in and changing who they are or telling them they're doing anything wrong. We get to keep what works, and then we get to expand and shift, or at least kind of gauge some other, or kind of build the toolkit of other ways to look at the dynamics. And it can be really supportive. That saying that it takes a tribe. Um, I know here in California, I noticed that we all are doing the same thing all day, throughout the day, every day, but we're doing them separate. So this is an opportunity to say you don't have to do that part separate. You can, ask the questions and learn about yourself. So much about this, we tend to react because um, I mean, I tend to use this example of like an anchor from a boat at the bottom of the water. You could follow those chains down, like you get triggered, you're yelling, or you're feeling really upset. And if you looked at what is that feeling? What does it mean to have that feeling? What's that mean? What is that feeling? You go all the way down to the bottom of that ocean and you recognize that there's a reason I reacted, and it's completely valid. And it's also not related to the situation, but it's
Right.
all history that I brought to this situation. And then we get to be ever learners. I love being a learner. I hope everyone listening, if you're listening to this, I know you want to be a learner because you're learning as we go. So I think I answered that, but
Yeah.
yeah,
I
finding
think a lot of parents, especially with teenagers, they say like, well, I don't know if something's, wrong going on or if they're just being a teenager because we see a lot in the media about the surly teenager, and that's not actually the norm, but people think it is from TV and movies. So they then think, oh, that's just what teenagers do. And so they're trying to differentiate that. We have a couple questions in the chat, but before I ask those, I wanted to follow up on something you said about the teenagers being depleted. And, I think this is really an epidemic of the life being sucked out of our kids. Um, my view is it's mostly from being overscheduled, too much pressure, and from technology. What are your thoughts and what are you observing about why they're depleted?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I find myself going like, when people say the overscheduled. Yes, as a concept of like overscheduled, doing things to just do them, I think that is problematic. I also know children that are thriving. They're like really passionate and interested in taking on the world because they find meaning in it. So I think if you are scheduling a child because they are initiating it, they're asking for it, they're thriving in it, they're getting themselves ready for it. And again, there's, some variations in this because it depends on your age and how much you're kind of joining. I don't say helping your child, but joining them to like get out the door and get their stuff together. The more we're collaborating, it's going to be more successful. But I think there's a huge difference. So a difference between
Absolutely, yeah.
and meaningful like vibrance and like excitement. So
Yes.
don't necessarily cut your children out of activities just to say, oh, you need to sit home, because we actually live now in a technological world where not having schedules means parents and families are defaulting to now you're home, but you're on a screen. But
Yeah.
at least you're resting. And that's not what I don't think that's what we mean. So finding a balance. To me, if the child has a balance, um, then they're not depleted. And so when you're saying what's contributing to the exhaustion or depletion, to me, it's that there isn't a balance. the children are filling their time, they're spending like 5 hours on one thing versus spending meaningful. It's more of that quality, not quantity. So again, take technology. There's rarely anything I could make the argument in our daily lives that we do for 2 hours, 5 hours straight with no breaks. Meaning even school, 7.5 hours. I could talk about that all day of like, does it really need to be that long? But it's still multiple different things happening. It's not consumption all day long. It's creating, it's partnering, it's play, right? But sports, there's always a beginning, there's a warm up, there's a dialogue, there's a practice, there's the game part, right? There's always thinking moving. So if your child's over consumed with one thing repetitively, I think it's exhausting and they need to.
And that happens on social media. If they're scrolling through TikTok or Instagram Reels, there's this kind of repetition without a break because the next one comes on the second you're done, and you don't get a break, or the kids don't get a break because it's just moving from one to the other.
Right.
And there's no like pause or intermission or commercial break or whatever you'd want to call it.
Yeah. And I know there's questions, but just to say
Yeah.
that that same thing happens, that exhaustion happens with kids doing 7.5 hours of intense academic work that's not collaborative, and then going home and doing tutoring and testing and more academics, which is for an outcome. It's a product. It's not meaningful. It doesn't have any value to them. We think it does for long term, but they're not finding connection. That's exhausting.
Yeah,
Playing an
absolutely.
activity, doing anything where you're doing it to do the external, like that end result, it's exhausting.
Mm,
Switch that and bring meaning, and they are energized.
absolutely.
I
I
could, yeah,
agree.
I could.
So Dr. Zeltzer has some questions for you. Um, she's asking how you would work with a teen who has chronic pain and is on the autism spectrum. And I think that might go along also with her second question about teens who have pain but are fearful. Well, I guess it's different. Let's start with the first one. They have pain and they're autistic.
Yeah, big question.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I think I want to honor respect to all the differences, all the nuances and individualized ways to interact with someone. So that's just my kind of ethical statement there.
Sure.
Uh, but I think with a child who is neurodivergent and they're having pain, I think really giving them space to honor that it's there. So, like, how do I'd be curious with the child or the family, how do we know it's pain? I know that with this profiling, there may be some type of patterning of that repetition or rigidity, that feeling of like pain is always pain. And I would want to get curious with them on, could it also just be a sensation that's different?
Mhm.
So how do we discern which part is pain and which isn't? So it kind of looks like those somatics, like what's the shape, what's the color, what's the texture. If this individual had a passion for drawing or they had a passion for um, any hobbies, any activities, I would pull those preferences into the session, and through those activities, there's a discernment. They know how that, whatever they're interested in, they know where it begins and where it ends. And that's the same thing as pain. We want to relate it to that. Where does the pain begin and where does it end? And then is there other language? I would want to kind of expand. If they're nonverbal, I would want to expand their movement profiling. If it's verbal, I'd want to stretch that vocabulary out. What are other ways that we could describe this sensation? And I think above all, and I know I could keep going, but I know with the children I've seen over the years from chronic pain in the hospitals and in private practice, it's empowering them to notice that it's real. But it's not all of them, it's a part of them. And it's also just one sense of sensation, it's not the only sensation. So I want to give them access to other sensations. So again, we're building that toolkit. But when they feel empowered, it's just incredible. I like brings tears to my eyes when I have kids that are like, thank you for seeing that it's real. Um,
Mhm.
and there can be a lot of fear around like, if I tell you I'm also not in pain right now, does it mean that the pain never was there? Like I was faking it. So it's giving permission that it can be there and it also can be lessened and it also could go away and it also can come back and it's all valid. It's all in the realm of this experience. I could go on more. I think the other piece would be to give that child a sense of organization, have them have some control over something, because that's why I love working with the body, because pain and being in a body that's even that neurodivergence, it can feel like you can't, it's like things are uncontrollable. Things are happening to you. So we want to give this child a sense of value and responsibility and something they can take on, that they can be in charge of, feel really like they can um, have their hands on.
Yeah, I have had several clients who even question, am I really in pain or am
Mhm.
I faking this? And they're not, but like what actually is reality? A lot of times because so many doctors don't validate that they're in pain. And so they start to question it and then they think and then they say to me, "Am I crazy? Or is this like, am I really crazy and it really is all in my head? Am I really feeling this?" Um, but there is almost always, and I talk to parents about this all the time about their children, almost always a fear of getting better because of many reasons that we're not going to go into here, but one of which has to do with what you're talking about, like, did it mean it was not real or not serious if I can get better?
And some of that duality, I know there's a second question, but that duality, that ability, it's a very young lesson, but we often have to learn it throughout our lives, is can two things exist at once? So I
Mm,
have so many stories where the doctors will say that child can't move. They're in pain, they can't move. And I'll say, well, they can't move how? Not maybe fast, but what about slow? Maybe not right arm, but left arm, right? So like I often say to the child, you may move. And all of a sudden they're like, I may? And I'm like, you may. And all of a
mm,
sudden they're moving, right? And the doctor's like, how are they moving? They couldn't lift their arm over their head. And I'm like, I'm not making them lift their hand over their head, but all of a sudden we're climbing in the jungle and that's just the movement they're doing. And
mhm,
letting the child know, like, you may be in pain and also go in the pool.
mhm,
Okay. Like I could do both. Yeah, yeah, you can keep your pain if you want it. You can have pain and swim. I can. And all of a sudden they're swimming and they're like, the pain's less, but it's still there. I'm like, yeah, you can have both. You can be scared and still go to sleep. It's okay. You can have that emotion.
right. Right, so that kind of segues into the second question about teens or kids with chronic pain who are fearful of moving their body because of the pain.
Yeah. So that's where I know I said earlier on that acronym dance or movement. It is really understanding that movement is just like what you, Samantha, and I are doing. We're talking, we're dancing, we're going back and forth. Movement's always happening, heartbeat, breath, eyes flickering, gestures, posture. So it's inviting the child or individual to notice they're already moving. So I'm not telling them a prescribed way of moving. I'm not asking them to do a certain amount of jumping jacks or learn a TikTok dance. We're not learning anything like prescribed. They're already moving. So it's amazing. Again, I can't make this stuff up. I have endless stories, but a child will be like, I'm not moving. Again, I have to say, honestly, that's a question adults ask me. They say, like, what if the person doesn't want to move? And I can tell you in over 20 years, like, no one's ever actually said that to me. Like,
Well, I wanna clarify, I don't think it's that they don't want to, like the teen, being, like, stubborn about it. I think it's more of because of the pain, they're scared to move.
yeah. So again, that's where we give them support to say, you may decide to move. How would you move? So a couple of things. One is, how could you move? Like, change the timing, the weight of it, meaning like, is it heavy movement or is it light? Is it direct, like you're going to one point? Are you indirect, like popping bubbles around you? There's lots of different ways. There's opposites, like we're moving the lower half of our body, the upper part of our body, like all the different explorations of how we can move. And then also there's awareness, just like sitting in the body and being aware of like the imagery of movement.
Mhm,
Had kids just even imagine themselves moving or watch their parents move and they're watch, and all of a sudden the child would be moving with them, even though they're like not sure. And then the third thing I just want to mention about movement, pain, is using imagery, using storytelling, using music, using alternative arts, right? To all of a sudden invite sports, nature. It is amazing what, if you're moving like an animal or moving like the tree outside my window, all of a sudden you're moving and the fear, again, I don't disregard it, but you have access to other opportunities of how your mind and body work together. So the
mhm.
examples that I would explore with those children.
I had a client, I do a lot of imagery in my work, and I had a client who wanted to use the image, which I loved, of being underwater and being in a kelp forest and kind of like the movement of the kelp. And as she was talking, I felt myself doing this as, as we were talking about it. And then we just started, waving. And ever since then, I use that imagery because it's so flowing, but it was a funny thing that we kind of both started to move in that same way together as she was, even though her eyes were closed, as she was talking about that imagery.
Yeah, I see it all the time, moving, passing a ball, and kids. I love our language. Semantics are very meaningful, but our words are quite movement oriented. If
Mhm.
we think of how people, our mantras, things we say about each other, like shake it off. Like we say these things, they're movements, or like, oh, I feel so heavy, I'm depressed. I mean, it's all these movement words. And so as the child's talking, we can be like, you see it in their body. What is that? You just said that. What did that look like? What happened in your body when you just said that?
Right. Right. Yeah. Do you ever do family therapy with group movement or, using
Yes.
the whole family together moving? How do you do that? What does that look like?
Absolutely. I do want to say that, in this work, there's again, I keep saying that prescription. It can be sitting and talking, like it does look like therapy, like psychology,
Mm,
for us clinicians out there. But again, it's that lens of that there's always this connection to the body and seeing that. But absolutely, I do work with families, siblings, parents, whole families together, in any version of those relationships. So it could be, one parent and child or any version. Um, yeah, some of the themes that kind of come up are creating the model of our family, how we all move together. If child was going to manipulate everybody and where they would stand, playing things like a movement charades. How does everyone move and interact together? I love exploring space. How close does the family member want to be, and how far away does everybody want to be? I love working on weightedness, so trust. Can the parent hold the child the way the child needs to be held, and vice versa? Can a child hold the parent? What does that look like? It's incredible to see parents and children problem solving. How do you hold someone that's bigger than you? But hold could be anything. It could just be a hug. It could be laying next to each other, or it could be like physically off the ground. Um, and then also just sharing control, passing the leadership, having parents follow their child, having child follow parents, and there is a parallel process. If your child has trouble following you, the parents will often say, like, they don't listen to me at home. If the parent doesn't follow the child, it's typically the same thing. Oh, there's that mutual understanding and respect. The last example I can give, is helping the parent and child read each other's communication. So if a child is expressing, there's many different props, but one of them is a body sock. It's this like spandex material that you get inside like a body sock or a sleeping bag. And the child gets to move in around in it, and the child can see, but we can't see the child's facial expressions. You just see the outline of them. And the child will be expressing an emotion or an event, and the parent will be experiencing a feeling. And then we get to discern that the parent might be feeling joy in all the movement, and the child might be inside struggling. And that's
mhm,
not to cause pain or conflict, but to recognize, how do we get each other to understand that nonverbal communication and the
mhm.
things that come up.
Right,
And or is it okay that we have two different feelings at the same time? Mom feels this and I feel this, right?
right, right.
So
Sometimes
endless.
have the family members keep up a balloon together, and it's funny to see the dynamic that comes up through that
Yeah.
shared movement experience. It's interesting as you were talking, I was thinking about one of my kids when she was really little, like maybe as young as 4. She would always want me to sit in her lap, and I would always, like, feel like I was gonna crush her because obviously I'm so much bigger than her. She was so young, and I would kind of, like, hold myself up, and she would say, "No, no, sit all the way, sit all the way," and I would always think, like, I'm gonna crush this child. And then I realized later that she needed that weight, and she ended up needing a weighted blanket. And
Mhm.
she was just looking for that, that weight, that pressure on herself. Even at 6 months old, she would grab my hands and press them hard onto her face. And, from that young age, she knew that she needed that, and I just thought she was playing at first, and then it took a while to realize that that was just a sensory experience that she needed.
Absolutely. Yeah. And our kids are always doing these signs, those nonverbals that it is like trying to keep up. It's like reading. I could go on a whole story about our pet bunny rabbit that moves around and I try to decode what it's trying to tell me. And I feel like I get it with kids, but all that to say, like there's so much room to kind of see that there's meaning in it. And our kids are really excellent at telling us there's a reason why they're slowing down when you're trying to get out the door. They're not just trying to be difficult, but they might be anticipating what's coming next. There's a movement quality that happens.
Right.
So endless examples like that. It's lovely to hear that outcome.
Yeah, it's interesting about the getting out the door because I would say that the majority of my clients talk about the the stress and anxiety about the rush to get out the door. And I speak to parents a lot about slowing down that movement because the parents are frantically running around getting stuff together and rushing the kids, and the kids are feeling really overwhelmed by that rush of movement and stress. And so I work a lot with parents about like doing anything they can the night before or the morning of so that everything can slow down for their child. And because it takes longer to get out the door because the child gets overwhelmed and then they can't do it.
Yeah,
Feel like
and
that's something
that
you
moment impacts more moments. So that we might forget that, oh, because it was stressful the past 10, 20 times, now my child has this experience of transitions being hard. Versus the family that makes transitions quite easeful. The child's like always out the door, and other parents might say, how do you do that? How does your child get out the door? Well, because it's been easeful all the time. They have this connection to it. They're my helpers. We join together. We dance our way out, right? Or we slow down. So it's really recognizing that we can build patterns and we want to build positive patterns as well.
Yeah, when you say dance your way around, I mean, it makes me think about also, through movement and through language, making it fun instead and doing the same exact thing, but making it fun as you're doing it. I mean, you can hop to the door like your bunny rabbit and get them out easier than you can saying, "We have to go, we have to go." Yeah,
How often we say we're going to be late, we're going to be late. It doesn't make us earlier. Yeah. And
right.
then I get the response sometimes when I'm talking more so in the past. And now I completely embrace this idea of play being meaningful and movement being everything. And I'm okay with that. At the same time, I'm aware that some parents and individuals hearing this might be like, I don't want to be creative, or I'm not a creative person, or I don't want to always be playing. Like sometimes it's business, like we got to get out the door. We have things to do. And so none of this is to disregard that. It's
Mhm,
just that we can get that outcome that you want in a way that's meaningful. So I think the playfulness, the reason why we say, or I say play, is not necessarily just to make everything always silly. It just means it makes everything meaningful. There's a
mhm,
reason we're getting out the door. And I truly believe kids, when they know the meaning, they will do everything every time. And when it lacks meaning, they will do everything to not do it because they're smart. They're so competent. And they're like, that doesn't make sense. Why would I do that? But, and I, all these examples, but if they understand the reason, they know you're helping daddy get out the door and we have to get there because our teacher Joe is going to have a big smile and teacher Joe's been waiting for us and he's so excited to see us. And this is when it starts so that everyone has a turn. If they really understand the capacity of it.
mhm. Well, that speaks a little to our educational system and the fact that so many kids don't find meaning at school and that it's long and tedious and not inspiring, and so they don't really feel that meaning to get out the door, but if they're in a good educational setting, then yes, but
Well,
it's
there's-
tough when they're not.
Absolutely. I agree. I agree. Yeah. And just knowing that no, whatever age your child's at, if you're feeling that resistance, that we might want to check in on like, what's this about? Why are we doing that for? And maybe
Right.
they don't know. Even as brilliant as they are, maybe they're not sure why, the why behind it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and looking at their body language, even let's say you're waiting in that line in elementary school where they line up to go in, if they're looking kind of shut down,
Mhm.
what is that about
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
all those settings, not just at home?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really supporting teachers to explore that, and they've got to do a lot to explore. So then we work on the child understanding that, like maybe there is a lot of visual stimulation in that line. Maybe the body feels like it really wants to. It's got its internal tigger. It really wants to go, but it's being kept still. So what can they move? Can they move their little fingers in line? Can they use their eyes to rapidly see all the colors around them? Can they pay attention to the goal of like we're about to go to this class, really helping them find those connections. And it's
Yeah.
a process. I don't see kids as a product that we have to like, fix and change, but really just helping them and recognizing these things and even doing it for ourselves. We know when we're impatient, what's that about? What's the meaning of this? Does it serve us? Is it helpful or not? Yeah.
Well, thank you. We have 5 more minutes. Is there anything that, and there doesn't have to be, but is there anything that you feel like you wanted to communicate that we haven't covered? Specifically, I would say tailored towards Chip's mission of creative healing, um, for youth with chronic pain. Is there anything that you kind of were hoping to convey that you haven't had a chance to with my questions today?
I think we covered so many angles, and I love this work. So I just invite all of you to connect and collaborate together, ask questions, get curious. And I think instead of seeing our kids, we talked about this early on, rather than seeing our kids as like, um, they just don't want to do something or they can't do it, to really look at the body, to clue you in for your child that it might just be uncomfortable, meaning maybe their sensory system doesn't allow them to be in those group settings. So they say they don't like sports, but it's really not about the sport. It's about their body feeling regulated and safe in that environment. Um, I think organization is such a critical piece of this mental health work. So really thinking about how you're organizing your lives. We're going into summer, really thinking about those, open schedules, but having some beginning, middle, and ends in there. Um, and I guess there's so many things, but when in doubt, I would just invite everyone to keep moving and see value in it. Find some time today, later today, when you pick up your kids, over any interactions, just really engaging with your bodies, using your eyes, looking, breathing together, moving together, playing together.
Yeah, that leads to a last question that I actually had about matching your child's level of movement or style, not necessarily just movement, but even like the way they move their bodies, but also like the way they speak. Because I notice that some kids, let's say, are slower in their movements and their speech, and they get a little overwhelmed by their parent kind of coming at them with really fast, rapid questions and like saying things, quickly, and they get kind of overwhelmed, and I try to get the parents to just like slow down and match how their child is. Can you talk about that a little bit for just like a minute?
Yeah, yeah. So it's a little bit of like patting your head and rubbing your belly, a little like trick, um, for lack of another word, like a little activity to try is to really think about if you are fast. I'm even speaking fast right now. If you are fast, you actually can be talking fast and moving your hands or your body slow. So you don't, when we say mirroring our child or joining your child, you don't have to join all of you. You get to still be differentiated you. There's a separateness, right? And so just kind of playing with that idea of like your body could be matching your child while your voice is saying we need to get out the door, like, we're going fast. So
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
those timing. And then what I love about dance movement therapy, this lens, is that we also add in these other dynamics. We actually amplify things. So not only do you have to match your child and be the same, sometimes you can be even bigger than them, and sometimes you can be even smaller. If you tend to be someone, the example we just were talking about is a parent moving really fast, maybe try being even slower than your child. Let them be the
Mhm.
leader, right?
Mhm.
And I have a book out there, and one of the analogies I use in it is that the child's like the wave, and we're being that big whale. We're not stopping the wave. We're not telling the child to be different. We're just being so big that they're like, "Oh wow, I see you."
Mhm.
Or we're being that little starfish where they can look in and see the delicacy and the nuance of it. Um, and the last thing I was just going to mention about the mirroring is, oh, I lost it. I'll pause there.
No
Uh,
problem. What's the name of your book?
it's called, I don't have it out here. It's called Moving Moments Through Childhood in a Dance Movement Therapy Lens for Supporting the Whole Child. And it takes us through 50 different vignettes of stories of children in therapy using an integrative dance movement therapy lens. And then it goes into the theory and research behind it, and also activities that everyone can use within their own work or in your home.
Great, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This was a very, enlightening discussion and I think helpful to all parents of kids, all different kids. So thank you so much for participating in the CHIP webinar. And again, to people participating, if you feel like these live webinars are helpful, we would really appreciate a $25 donation. All CHIP activities are free for everyone. So having these donations is very helpful to keep things going. So thank you again. We will definitely look for your book.
Thank you so much for the dialogue and the questions. I look forward to more collaboration.